uphill battle because this requires money, and certainly there's a lack of that, and member states are reluctant to increase the size of the European budget. And also there's a brain drain. So, we have some of our best talent are leaving the continent because there are no jobs. And this is really a major problem. So, over the next number of years in Europe, enlargement then is the last issue I will just mention briefly. There are a number of countries at the door, in the waiting room. Croatia joined, as we know, this year. Montenegro wanted to join. Turkey, of course, has been looking to join for a very, very, very long time. I don't know when it's going to join. I have no crystal ball. Serbia, of course, most recently. Kosovo, of course, has got their eyes set on membership as well. Britain wants to leave, so perhaps there will be an empty seat for one of those countries to take over. And the British question, of course, becomes hugely important as well, renegotiating enlargement and membership. So on the enlargement side, in many ways there's enlargement fatigue. Many would agree that we left too many in too quickly, and the process of adjustment has been quite, heavy. I would, I suppose, agree to that because we've had a lot of countries who've come in, and after membership, there's very little leverage over them to make them stick with what they promised. We see this with Hungary in particular, where the government there has really been, showing the middle finger to Europe after they joined in terms of fallback or rolling back on some of the things like freedom of the press, independent central bank, independent press ombudsman, and so on. Those kind of things have been really, really distasteful in Hungary in terms of liberal democracy being kicked out the door. So there's been a power grab. And you see also in countries like Poland, where you had the Kaczynski government that were far more concerned about asking Germany for reparations from World War II than they were about economic development and advancement for their country. So you have countries where post-membership, they also Greece with the euro, they haven't been quite straightforward, and they haven't been a communitarian player. So enlargement, I would say, is going to take a back seat. The Greek presidency of the European Union comes up in January. They have removed enlargement from their agenda. So there will be no discussion of enlargement during that presidency in terms of their priorities, which is just published this week, which is interesting. So that agenda is not dictated by the Greeks. It is agreed largely in the Council of Ministers that we're going to take enlargement off the agenda, at least for a while. That's not to say, of course, that there won't be talks continuing between the European Union and those applicant countries, but I would say that there's not going to be much activity, at least in the short term. So I will leave it there and open for questions.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Great. Covered a lot of ground and very interesting, so thank you. Is there anybody open for questions? Anybody have questions? Yeah, Togo.
You started off telling us that talk of Armageddon and collapse was overdrawn, and I think we can all pick up on that, but it seemed that the burden of the evidence that you offered suggested that there was very little basis for optimism. Indeed, you seem to suggest at the end that Europe is very non-competitive in the world situation. How much basis do you see for optimism in the future of the euro in writing itself and the European Union in terms of dealing with these economic challenges?
I would like to think that I'm presenting more of a realist interpretation more than a pretend that everything's rosy in the garden. But as I said yesterday at the book launch, when some were asking about the collapse, and I was my attitude is, well, no European leader wants it on their headstone that they were on their political headstone that they were responsible for the collapse of the single currency or the European Union. So I can't see any of that happening. If you throw enough money at a problem, it usually goes away, and they have spent a lot of money on bailouts, either the ECB and the IMF combined. What I do see happening is really the emergence of this banking union they have been talking about. And the banking union, I think, in light of what's happening, whether you are pro-integration or whether you're a Eurosceptic or more mildly intergovernmentalist, I think someone needs to do something about the banks. Like, this has been a very, very costly bailout exercise. And you need banking oversight. Now, ironically, we already had oversight. The ECB had oversight. There's the ECB Board of Governors, where every national central bank governor is part of this system. So either, one of the problems we had was, in many European countries, you have a bank. The bank has a board of directors. So Professor Trix is a former commission official or a European commissioner. Oh, it would look good now having her on our board. But she's an anthropologist. She doesn't know anything about a balance sheet. But she looks good for the optics. So investors say, oh, we have a former commissioner on the board. That looks good. So you didn't have anyone on boards of banks asking the right questions. So this is why I think we need a banking union really to deal with some of these issues, where you can see what they're doing and have proper oversight and regulation. I think because the day for allowing banks to deal in the most dodgy and most risky of investment vehicles is over. They can do that, but at least divide it from normal banking practices. So from regular customers' deposits, they cannot be touched. If you want to go and invest $1 billion or $1 trillion in one of these dodgy practices, well, do that with someone else's money. So, and this is one of the problems that we faced with those. Too much of other people's money was being used on these issues. So I think the banking union is really a step in the right direction, if they can agree on this post-German elections. But I do see, there's an uphill challenge. How do you deal with this massive amount of unemployment? This mountain of unemployment, and the mountain of debt. Now, do we have a massive debt write-down? Is that even possible to have a massive debt write-down? Do we see? You see, the European Union could survive without the euro. You maintain the single market. That's really the core to this whole process. So if you want to be bold and original, do you get rid of the single market and go back to the old currencies and just maintain the single market? Go back before 1992. But the problem is there's no reverse gear in the European integration process. It's a forward-moving process. And Brussels would never allow us to go back. No reverse. There's no rear-view mirror, you see. It has to be forward-moving. And I don't believe this is actually a healthy process. I think you have to have flexibility in integration. It can't just be an irreversible advance. So I argued actually in 2010 that Ireland should have left the euro and gone back to its old currency and devalued, cut your debt. It would have been messy, but how then can you pay down 200 million of debt with 4 million people and 14% of employment? So you have a generation of debt, which I know in America is not that bad because everybody has debt in this country. Like, students have got mountains of debt because of the education system. But like, a lot of them get great jobs as lawyers afterwards, so they pay it down relatively quickly. But those days now are over as well. So we're in an era, an age of huge debt. And I don't know whether we just need one massive write-down of this and start afresh in the hope that things will improve. But in the European Union, there's a huge amount of distrust. And that's one of the problems that we have now, that member states don't trust each other to tell the truth. And what they're presenting may not be the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Because you have these banks that were asked repeatedly, what's your exposure? Only to find that they didn't fully tell us what they were exposed to, and we need further bailouts. So the Irish case, the Irish bank said in 2010, we need 7 billion. But then there was secret tape recordings made of them. Or somebody, I don't know who recorded the conversation. But the banker said, listen, ask them for 7. Tie them in. And once they've given you 7, they'll give you 30 more. So you can't ask for 30 immediately, ask for 7. And then tell them the full magnitude of the story. So you hook the government in. They don't want to lose their 7 billion. So asking for more, and this was one of the problems with the bank, that they weren't fully open with us. So, I don't know what you can do, a debt write-down, get rid of the euro, go back to national currencies and leave them deal with it that way, but, my biggest worry at the moment is the rise of unemployment and the rise of the far right and the far left in Europe. That this feeds into these groups, and you see it in Greece with New Dawn, you see what Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, you see it in Finland. These countries, Finland and the Netherlands, were never Eurosceptic, they were never that antagonistic. You see UKIP in Britain. This is my biggest concern, that European leaders are not visionary enough to deal, they don't have the courage to deal and tackle the far right and the far left. Instead, they're more likely to pander, as we see with David Cameron and the referendum. He's not doing this because of Eurosceptics in his party. He's doing this because of UKIP. Harold Wilson in 1973-74 called a referendum because of internal opposition in the Labour Party. David Cameron is doing it because of opposition in other parties. So he's pandering, rather than attacking and tackling and exposing UKIP. He actually is saying, okay, well, we're going to go down this road. So he's trying to steal their thunder, but it's not necessarily a good thing. You're giving UKIP more exposure. So I would be worried that there's a correlation between the rise of unemployment and the rise of the far right and the far left. So yeah.
Any questions? Maybe a couple more questions if we have time.
I'll take another one. Yeah.
Go ahead, Francis.
Oh yeah, sure.
What was it that Iceland did? I know they're in a different thing, but didn't they have a very different approach?
Yeah, the Icelandia Bank. Yeah, they went belly up, and they had borrowed again this interbank lending. They were massively exposed to a couple of banks in Britain and a couple of banks in the Netherlands. And you have to admire the Icelanders. I mean, there's only a few 100,000 of them. There's not many of them. But what they did was they defaulted. So the bank went bankrupt. The government didn't bail it out. The Dutch and the British took them to court. And there was a change of government in between, not unsurprising. And they held a referendum on whether or not they should pay back the Dutch and the British. And of course they voted overwhelmingly not to pay them back. And they haven't. I mean, I think it is still in court, but they decided they were not going to pay them back. The money is gone. The bank lost the money.
So they said, fully to the bank.
Yes, the state, and by extension the taxpayer, was not going to give back. I mean, you're talking about, what, I don't know, 11 billion euro? It's not an insignificant amount of money for a country the size of Iceland. But they had a referendum and they said no. So, and then that gave political cover to the politicians not to do this. But the Dutch and the British are still going through the courts looking for their money. So that was a novel approach. And they've all approached it differently. The Greeks have protested. And then you have the Spanish who had their protests. The Irish just said, okay, we'll pay it back. No protests, nothing. So they've all approached this process very, very differently. You have to admire the Icelanders, I think, in many ways.
Yeah. Is that one more question, and I have time for one more if there is one. Okay. Well, this is very wide-ranging and informative talk. Thanks very much, Michael. Appreciate you coming in again. And thanks for coming.